My name is Jennifer, and you can find me on Ravelry as Alindria or on Instagram as Alindria Knits. And in this video, I am going to talk to you about using the Ladderback Jacquard technique in your stranded colorwork socks, and more specifically in my design, Heartsplosion. So in this design, you can see that these hearts are kind of randomized and they're all different sizes. And so you're going to get some pretty long floats in some areas. In some of the larger hearts, you would have some long floats, as well as in some of the spaces in between the different sections here, you can have some long floats. So you're going to need a way to deal with that. Now, you are free to use whatever method of catching your floats that you want. However, Ladderback Jacquard, or LBJ, as you might see it abbreviated a lot, is useful for several reasons. It introduces more yarn into the pattern so that your socks will have more stretch. It also helps the color that you're not currently working with. It stays in the background more. Sometimes when you just twist two yarns together to catch it, that color that you're not working with at the moment, it can peek through and you'll see like little blips of the other color on the outside of your knitting. There are several different ways to set up LBJ, and I highly encourage you to go look at those other videos, because it doesn't really matter which method you pick of doing LBJ. You just need to watch the videos and pick one that seems to resonate with you and then try it. They will all get you to the same destination, and there's some great videos out there. But a couple years ago, during Sock Madness, which is a competition that I've participated in a few years, I knit this sock. And as you can see, this sock also has a random pattern. And several months ago, I went to go look up the tutorial that I used to do the LBJ in this sock, and I couldn't find it. And I finally figured out that the tutorial I had used was a photo tutorial, and the link to it no longer works. So I decided that in this project I was going to try to replicate how I did LBJ in this sock, because as you can see, this sock is not blocked, but it looks pretty good, right? I mean, for being unblocked, it's not too much puckering or too many lines. And let me show you the inside. Okay, so this is the inside. And when you are setting up your ladders for the whole ladder back part of it, you have a couple different options. In a more regular pattern, and by regular I mean one that has, predictable repeats, right? It might benefit you to have the ladders set up very evenly across the sock, and then you just carry on those whole ladders. You just carry those ladders down the whole length of the sock. But when you have a more random design, like my heart's right over here, and then this one, you have the option of starting and stopping the ladders. You start a ladder whenever you need one, whenever you have a big stretch of stitches in one color and you need to carry that second color behind, you can start a new ladder. And then you can close or end the ladder whenever you're done with it, which is what I did on these socks, and which is what I have done on my Heartsplosion socks. I do have one caveat about this method. when you start the ladders on this sock, they're not attached to the rest of the sock. As you can see right here, I can stick my finger under some of these ladders. But it's not the same as having just random long floats hanging out, because these floats are anchored by all the other ladders right here. You can see here's a ladder. And if you're wondering why this looks different from other LBJ tutorials you've seen, instead of purling the ladders, I knit the ladders. Which, for one thing, it makes it, in my opinion, it makes it a little bit easier. Now, if you're purling your ladders and you're happy with that, there's no need to change. But if this is a new technique that you're just learning, or maybe you just want the inside of the sock to be smoother, like maybe at least on the bottom of the sock, maybe you want to knit your ladders and not purl them, because it'll give you a smoother inside. Because otherwise you're going to have, a line of knit stitch. Like I said, there are pros and cons of all the different ways to start LBJ. But I don't have an issue. I can put on the socks, slip them on, my toes don't get stuck or anything like that, because, they're attached. They're not going anywhere. It's totally up to you, as I've said, which method you want to choose, and I encourage you to try different methods. I feel like sometimes when we're knitting, we get stuck on, what's the right way or what's the best way to do something? And sometimes there are multiple best ways of doing something. For example, if you do go look at other tutorials, you may find one where you start the ladder by lifting up the right leg of the stitch below, and then you go into that. And some people say that, that might cause the stitch to be distorted a little bit. So like I said, there are pros and cons. And if you try one method and you don't like it, like if you try the method I'm going to show you here in this video and you don't like it, then switch. Go try a different method next time. It doesn't matter. They're all going to accomplish the same thing, and you're going to end up with a lovely stretchy sock at the end. Okay, so how do you do this particular method? I've started my second sock here, and I am all set up. I have my pattern off to the side here so I can see it. And I do knit my sock inside out. So I'm going to have another video about that you can check out. But you can see pretty easily here, this will be the outside of the sock. So hopefully I'll be able to show you that as I knit along. Okay, so this next round, I'm going to have a 7. And when I say that, that means I'm going to have 7 stitches in a row of the same color. So I'm going to be knitting 7 stitches in red, and then 1 stitch in the dark gray, and then 7 more stitches in red. So when you're setting up your ladders, and you have a long float, you want to start a new ladder every 3 to 5 stitches. Some people don't like going past 4. I'm okay with 5. But I'm going to be knitting 7 stitches in red next. So that means I'm going to need to start a ladder. So I'm going to knit 4 stitches in red. And then I'm going to start a ladder. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the color that I'm working with forward so it's out of the way. And that forward part, no matter what method you use, is extremely important. You have to bring that color forward. Now I'm going to take the color, I like to call it the color that's backstage. You know, it's waiting for its turn to go on. And I'm going to make a backwards loop. Now, if you forget which direction that the loops go and you make it the other direction, like this, it really doesn't matter too much. I've tried out both ways. One way will just get you an extra twist, which will have a little bit of extra, like an extra bump in the back, but it's really not a big deal if you can't remember which way to make the loop. Okay, so I've set up that loop, and now I'm taking the color that I'm working with and bringing it to the back again. You always want that color to cross in front of your setup. No matter whether you are diving into a stitch and pulling up a loop or making a loop as I have done here. Okay, so I bring it to the back and I knit my other 3 stitches. And then I've got 1 stitch in the dark gray, and I'm going to knit. I have another 7 coming up. That's what I call them in my head. That's how I remember how many stitches to knit. I just say I have a 7, or I have a 6, or I have a 9. And if I have any color that's more than a 5, that means I'm going to have to add a ladder. So again, bring the color you're working with forward, and then your backstage color, the one that's waiting to come on. Make a loop, and then you bring your other color to the back, so that it's crossing in front of your backstage color. That's how I like to think of it. Okay, so I've just completed my 7 stitches, and next I'm going to show you what happens when you get to those stitches that have been set up, because I have one coming up here. Okay, so now I have an 8. I'm going to be knitting 8 stitches in red. And you can see I have a setup here, stitch setup, a ladder back that's in gray. And if you can see this, that gray stitch, it can be a little hard when you're first trying this technique to identify which stitches are the real stitches and which ones are the ladder stitches. But you'll notice the stitch, this gray stitch in here, is kind of peeking through. Like these stitches each have their own column. That gray stitch does not have a column. Like I said, he's backstage. He's just kind of peeking through the curtains there. It's not his turn to come on. So that's how I like to think of it. So you have that different colored stitch peeking through. So I knit these 4, because like I said, I'm knitting 8 stitches in red here. And then when I get to that ladder back stitch, no matter what method you have used to start your ladders, you will always bring the color that you're working with to the front. So you want it in front of that ladder back stitch. And then you will work that ladder back stitch in the other color. And this is where you can either purl this stitch with your other color, or you can knit it. And like I said, I find knitting it to be much easier, so I just knit it. And when I'm done knitting it, you take that other color, the color you're actually working with, the color that I'm making the heart with, and back. You're ready to knit your other 4 stitches. Okay, now I have a 7 coming up. I'm going to be knitting 7 stitches in this dark gray. So I need to start another ladder. So I'm going to do, I'm going to do 4 stitches. And another thing you need to be aware of is the stitches at each end of your chart. So say, I'm ending with 7 gray stitches here. Well, how many gray stitches am I going to have on the other side to start with? And let's say I only had 5 gray stitches here. Well, I'd be fine. I don't need to add a ladder. But what if I have 3 stitches on the other end? I might want to add a ladder before I get to the end of the 5. But now I'm going to be just knitting 1 on this other end, on this other side when I come back to it. So I'm just going to add a ladder here. Let's see, I've knit 5. Okay, so now my gray is the color I'm working with. I'm going to bring it to the front. I'm going to take the red, make a loop and put it on that right hand stitch, and then bring the gray to the back. And then I'm going to knit these 2 stitches. Now, I'm actually going to show you something. What happens if you forget to bring that color to the front? So you think you bring it to the front, but you actually don't. And then you make your little loop in your backstage color. And then you realize, oh, I forgot. So this is still kind of crossing in front. Okay, let's just say it ends up in back. Let's try that again. Okay, so what happens, I'm taking you back here. What happens if you make this loop and you didn't realize you forgot to bring the other color in front? Well, you can just take this loop and you can do a little dance. You can slide that loop you made to the left, bring that color that's supposed to be in front, and then slide that loop back to the right, and then you can bring that color that's supposed to be in front to the back again and knit the rest of your stitches. And you can do that, like say you don't realize that you've messed up until the next round, and you can see that ladderback stitch came in front, you can still do the little dance, slipping the stitch and switching it. You don't have to backtrack. Now, one more thing that we need to do, that we need to learn, is how to close or end the ladders. So I'm going to knit to a place where we're going to close some ladders. Okay, so now I've come to the place in this heart. I'm only going to need 4 stitches in red, but I have this ladder in the dark gray back there, and I don't need it anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit these 2 stitches, and now I've come to that ladder. And to close your ladders or end your ladders, what you're going to do is you're just going to knit that ladder stitch with the stitch to the left of it. Or if you're working from the other direction where you have your stitches on the right hand needle and you're moving them to the left, then you would knit the ladder back with the stitch to the right. But here I'm knitting it together with the stitch to the left using the red. And when that happens, that ladder back just falls behind the red stitch and it disappears. Like I said earlier, I think I said this earlier, it's up to you how you set up your ladders. You could set up your ladders and have them run down the whole length of the sock. And then you would only set up your ladders once, and then you would close them when you get to the end. I don't like doing that because to me that's more work. I like starting my ladders and ending them when I don't need them anymore. makes me really happy to close those ladders. I don't know, it's really satisfying. And remember earlier when I said that because of the way in this particular method that these ladders are not anchored right at the beginning, they do get anchored when you do the knit two together and close them. Plus they're anchored by just being knit or purled. And in this particular heart pattern, sometimes you may start a ladder only to close it on the next round. And that is okay. It works just fine. Oh, and one more thing. The reason why it makes the sock stretchy is, you know, your normal knit stitches, they're going up and down like this in a wave pattern. That's a lot of yarn. And if you were to stretch that out, it would be much longer than a float. Like your float might only be this long. And that doesn't stretch as much, it doesn't give you as much room as something that would stretch and give you a whole lot more room. So with the ladderbacks, you're bringing the stitches by creating those knit or purl columns. Like I said, it doesn't really matter which one you do if you knit or purl those ladderbacks. It comes up and over the needle. So that's just introducing more yarn into the pattern. And that is one of the reasons why ladderback creates a more stretchy sock. Hello, it's about a week later, and sometimes procrastination pays off because I've thought of a few other tips I can tell you about using LBJ. The first thing I wanted to show you is that you can move your ladder if you would like to. You can move it one stitch to the left or right very easily by pretending, think of a 1x1 cable. What you would do, okay, so I have a ladder here in the pink, and what I want to do this time is I want to move it one stitch to the left. So I just pretend it's a cable, and you're always going to keep your ladder in back. So no matter which way you're crossing your stitches and rearranging them, you'll always keep that ladder in back. So I just rearrange those stitches just like you would a 1x1 cable. And now I will just continue knitting. And you don't have to do this in this sock. I'm just letting you know that it exists in case you do want to move your ladder. So you don't have to be worried about ladder placement so much because they can always be moved if you want them to. Or they can be closed and then you can start a new one later. So that is the first tip that I came back to show you. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about and show you is closing the ladders before the heel. So in this sock, the heel is just plain. It's not a patterned heel. So in this sock and any other sock where you would move on to just a plain colored heel, you're going to have to close the ladders on the back of the sock only. Now in this particular pattern, I have a setup row, which is basically just a purl row. And that is where you will close all your ladders. So if you were knitting, you close your ladders with a knit two together. So here's the pink ladder stitch, and I would knit two together with the stitch to the left. So when I do my purl row, I'm just going to do a purl two together with the stitch to the right. So when I do that, that pink stitch falls behind. And I'm going to be doing that every time I come to a pink stitch because the first row of the heel is all main color only. So we're getting rid of all the pink. And there's only one pink stitch in this last row. It was this heart. So that's the only pink stitch that will be purling regularly. Okay, so you purl those together and the pink falls to the back. Now, every time you get to a ladder, you will just purl 2 together. But you do have to check to make sure that you're not purling one of the stitches that's actually part of the pattern. You can just peek to the front a little bit. This pink stitch right here is actually part of the heart, so I will not purl 2 together then. I'll just do a regular purl. But the rest of these in this row, all the rest of these pink ones are ladders. So I will just purl until I get to the next ladder. And here's the next ladder coming up, so purl 2 together, purl them together, and you can watch that pink fall to the back right there, and that's what we want it to do. This is a little bit different right here because I have to decrease a stitch right there anyway, so I kind of purled 3 together, but you can just figure that out as you go. Okay, so I've done that setup row for the heel, and then now I will just flip it out and knit the heel. One other time you're going to have to close all of your ladders is right before the toe, because the toe is also solid color. But by then you'll be knitting right side out, and so you will just knit 2 together with those ladders to close them off. I've got one more trick to show you. One more thing I actually learned from one of my testers actually. Like I said, you don't have to do these ladders randomly like I have. You can put them every 4 stitches if you want. Now, obviously, this is not the pattern for my hearts. This is just something I made up for demonstration. But I thought it was helpful because one of my testers decided she wanted to put the ladders every 4 stitches. So she printed out her chart and took a highlighter, and then you can just highlight the lines. So I'm just highlighting the lines. Here, see if I can do it where you can actually see. I'm highlighting the line between 4 and 5 and 8 and 9. So you would just highlight every 4 stitches. And then while you're looking at your chart, you know where those ladder stitches are going to be. So if you're having trouble with placement or identifying which stitches are the ladder stitches, I thought this was a good tip to include. So I hope you have fun learning a new technique, or perhaps trying a different way of doing the technique. You know, it's not the easiest to get right away. I had to try a couple different methods before I was comfortable with it. So don't worry about it if you feel like this is so new, there's a lot of stuff to learn. Don't freak out, just go slow. It's always 1 stitch at a time. And you can deal with it when you get there. And it's a lot easier once you're actually doing it. So I hope this helps, and I hope you have fun knitting the Heartsplosion socks if you're knitting that, or whatever other Colorwork socks you're working on.